New Atlanta, Sector 11, Building 71G. 7 April 2072. 11:13 p.m. Hacker begins unauthorized entry into the Tri-Optimum corporate network. 1:26 a.m. Hacker attempts to access protected files concerning Space Station Citadel. 1:33 a.m. Tri-Optimum security forces apprehend the intruder.
System Shock was released in 1994. Developed by Looking Glass Technologies, a dev team whose claims to fame would be Ultima, System Shock, and eventually the original Thief game. The setting of the game was decided upon as the dev team had previously been working on the Ultima series, and the fantasy setting had grown stale. They wanted to try something different. This led them to build a sci-fi setting with a new IP that would allow them to pretty well develop the game any way they saw fit, without being constrained by any existing narrative. The goal of the development was to provide a more immersive and engaging experience for the player. They wanted to allow for complex movement and create a game world with maximum interactability. The team ended up creating a brand new engine to complete this task, rather than reuse their existing engine from Ultima. This is impressive dedication to the task on its own, but is further made impressive when you consider the game only took about a year and a half to develop. Their engine absolutely achieved the goal of creating an interactive world, with practically every surface and item able to be interacted with in some way, even if that way was just to tell you that you cannot interact with that surface. At launch, the game was received well, and sold somewhere in the realm of 170,000 copies, but never achieved the massive success of games like Doom. Much of the mixed reception can be attributed to the complex nature of the game. There is so much more you could physically do in the game, making the learning curve steep, especially in 1994, where something like this was practically unheard of. The game was non-linear, often with sections of backtracking, and you generally had to discern where to go next through environmental hints or by sifting through the dozens of audio logs you will pick up during your adventure. The game achieved so much, but was also extremely intimidating to a new player. One final shout out I have to give to the development cycle of this game is that System Shock was produced by Origin Systems, the company responsible for developing Cybermage a year later. Another cyberpunk-styled game that just does not get enough love. Watch my previous video on that title if you want to hear me gush about it like the fanboy that I am. The backstory of System Shock is all provided in the opening cinematic. You are an unnamed hacker, referred to only as Unidentified Tri-Optimum Employee 2-4601. While trying to hack into Tri-Optimum systems, you are caught and taken into custody. Edward Diego, an executive at Tri-Optimum, brings you aboard the Citadel station and offers you both amnesty for your crimes and a military-grade neural interface if you remove the ethical constraints from the station's AI program, Shodan. You may be asking yourself why Diego wants to remove the ethical reasoning system from an AI. Well, it's just for the reason you would expect. Because he did something illegal himself, and this is the only way he can think to cover his tracks. A real stand-up dude. Facing either complying with Diego, or presumably spending a lot of time in jail, we take Diego up on his offer to remove the ethics from Shodan. Diego, despite being a scumball, is a man of his word, and gets us down to medical to be fitted with our new neural interface. The surgery requires 6 months of recovery, during which we are in a medically induced coma. The surgery is a success, and we awaken 6 months later in the carnival of horrors that the station has become under the rule of the now unconstrained AI. The gameplay of System Shock is a bit of a mixed bag. Essentially, it is an FPS adventure RPG with Metroidvania elements. Most of what it does well. However, the obtuse controls and extremely limiting viewport are going to scare a lot of people away. I promise it's not as bad as it looks, but let's start with a brief introduction into what we'll be working with for the remainder of the game. Top left, we have our biomonitor. This serves no practical purpose other than to look sort of cool. You can pretty much disregard it. Next are the posture and view angle controls. These handle looking up and down, as well as crouch and prone. That's right, this game has the ability to crouch at 2 different heights. Also, as a fun fact, you can sprint while prone or crouching, which I can only imagine would be a terrifying visual for your enemies. Health and power are next. These are your standard status bars. Health at 0, you die. Actually, you don't die. You get transformed into a cyborg. with a pretty cool cinematic to go along with it. The cool thing about the death cinematic is that it shows you being turned into an enemy that actually exists in the game. The Cortex Reaver, a four-legged abomination somehow powered or enhanced by a dead human. Brutal as hell. Moving on. Middle center is your inventory panel. It has several pages to scroll through. The game has a lot of assorted weapons and power-ups, and this is where you'll activate them. You are limited on how many weapons you can hold to 8, but this will be more than enough. I found often there would be a best weapon given your progress in the game, and ammo was generally abundant. Next is where things will start to get a bit complex. Along the sides of your screen are 10 square buttons. Each of these corresponds to an unlockable power. You get things as mundane as a flashlight or message reader, to things more interesting such as jump jets or powered shields. There's also a power that shows a miniature view of what's behind you, like a ghetto backup camera. I never made any use of it. All of these are activated on the sidebars. The two large monitors on either side of the inventory are your multifunction displays, or MFDs. These are highly customizable to what you want to put there. I won't go through everything possible, but for me I generally kept my weapon status on the right and my map on the left. Also worth noting, I am playing the enhanced edition of the game, and you can turn this big display off in favor of a more modern looking scaled back design, but I honestly sort of prefer my submarine viewport looking HUD, so I'm going to opt to keep it on for the playthrough. Anyone who's seen my prior videos on Lands of Lore and Menzoberranzan should know by now that the boxy HUD makes me feel safe. With that preamble out of the way, the game essentially plays like an FPS, but the controls are a bit of a ride as well. You interact with the world through left clicking and fire using right click, and you need to constantly switch mouse look on and off depending on what you're doing. This is difficult to master, to say the least. You can change the key bindings in the Enhanced Edition, but I couldn't quite get things into a smooth state, and I ended up using the default control scheme. I felt I improved significantly by the end of the game, but never really mastered this control style. The good news is the game has a highly customizable difficulty to help account for some of the jankiness and learning curve. Before starting, you can choose difficulties separately in 4 categories: Combat, Mission, Puzzle, and Cyber. Combat is self-explanatory. Higher difficulties make enemies tougher. Mission affects the story elements of the game, with the lower difficulties removing a lot of the core gameplay and even taking out keycards and passcodes. The highest difficulty gives the whole game a 7-hour time limit. Puzzle changes the small mini-games required to open doors and activate certain objects. Higher difficulties make them more complex. The lowest setting turns them off entirely. Lastly is Cyber. It affects the gameplay in cyberspace. This is the perfect time to talk about the worst part of this game: cyberspace. You can find terminals throughout the game that give you access to the cyber world, a digital representation of being inside of a computer network. These sections allow you to open locked doors, get upgrades and data codes, and are mandatory in several sections, including the final boss fight. They are a mess. The controls in here are worse than the base game by far. You fly around like in a flight simulator, fighting ugly enemies and picking up geometric shapes in a hideous wireframe environment. It's ugly, unintuitive, and feels shoehorned in simply to give the game that 90s hacker aesthetic. I hate it. Luckily, it is a relatively minor part of the game. Back to exploring the real world. There are medical stations where you can heal, and power stations where you can recharge your power. Outside of this are batteries and first aid kits to accomplish the same thing. Combat with enemies is fine, but there's a serious lack of feedback when you're hit, and you die stupidly fast. I believe all the enemies in this game are either hit scan or attack in melee, and there is pretty much no delay to their attacks. If you're in range and visible to enemies, you will take damage. Luckily, you have some powerful tools at your disposal to counteract this sometimes unfair advantage the enemies have. One of the best of these are the restoration bays. Each floor has one, and by default they are set to turn you into a cyborg. However, if you can activate the restoration bay before you die, any subsequent death will not kill you, but instead revive you at the bay. This influence can be seen in current games, and is probably more widely remembered from the Vita chambers in BioShock. The last part of the gameplay I want to talk about is how the narrative is handled in System Shock. You don't ever physically interact with another NPC throughout the entire game. Instead, you come across audio logs and the occasional audio call that provide you with clues on what to do next and generally just flesh out the game world. Now, in the year 2024, this may seem pretty mundane, possibly not even worth mentioning as part of the gameplay, but when System Shock was released, this was an unheard of way to tell the story. It allowed the game to build depth and substance, but didn't get in the way of the gameplay like a giant dialogue box. You could have a game that told a story without forcing the player to read through pages of exposition. Truly a step forward for storytelling in the virtual space. The game starts right where the cinematic stopped. We awaken on the Citadel station, coming out of our 6-month coma. Right off the hop, we are contacted by Rebecca Lansing, a counter-terrorism consultant for Tri-Optimum. She informs you that something has happened on the station, and that you are the only person they can get a hold of. Also, that your neural implant makes you the only person capable of stopping Shodan left on the station. She informs you the station has a mining laser pointed at Earth, and if you can't find a way to stop it, the laser could cause destruction on a global scale. She also further tempts you, stating that she knows about the deal you made with Diego, and that if you can stop Shodan, they will excuse the illegal activity. I mean, that sounds fine, but from the sounds of things, if we don't stop Shodan, there won't be anyone left to punish me regardless. All that is great, but for now we need to get moving. In the next room we come across some hostile serve bots. We introduce them to our metal pipe and pick up our first real weapon, the dart gun. It sort of sucks, but it's better than nothing. I won't be giving a detailed breakdown of the weapons in this game, as I have in my previous videos, as, to be honest, there are a lot, and functionally they're all super similar. With a few rare exceptions, they are all either single fire or burst fire, and hit scan enemies. Not to undersell the weapon mechanics, they all have alternate ammo types, and some are more effective depending on the type of enemy you're facing. In the game's defense, I really wouldn't call this an FPS, at least not in the traditional sense, so I think we can excuse the fairly basic weapon system. I'll shout out any interesting weapons as we go. Heading out of the med bay, we get our first greeting from Shodan. However, it's a pre-recorded greeting from before the AI went rogue. As far as I know, this is the only glimpse of Shodan before she is unleashed, and the difference is night and day. Here she's talking about taking strolls in the on-board parks to keep your mental health stable, whereas the loosed version of Shodan is using those same parks as a biological experimentation lab. Just listen to the contrast here.
Welcome back to Citadel Station. We hope your somnolent healing stage went well. Today is the 6th day of November, year 2072. You are currently in the healing suites located on the first level. Enter that room, insect, and it will become your prey.
Really a great setup for what will be a strong villain throughout. Moving along, we find notes on how to stop the laser. It can't be turned off, but we can raise the shields and fire the laser within those shields to destroy it. Before we can fire the laser though, we need to get an isotope from research to power the shield and disable the safety override on the laser on the reactor level. Before moving on to the next section, we destroy the first of many CPU cores on the station. Destroying these brings down the security level for the current area, sometimes even unlocking secret areas with extra equipment. More importantly, destroying a CPU core will reveal a single-digit number. You will want to write this down, as we're going to need it later to compile a code to shut down Shodan. With medical pretty thoroughly taken care of, we move on to research. The entry to this level is absolutely rotten with mutants. It caught me completely off guard, and had me struggling so much with the game's clunky reloading system that I just decided to smash their heads in with a pipe instead. This was actually a really cool moment for me. The difficulty reloading while under stress forced me to use a lead pipe instead. Like, stop and think about how immersive that is. In reality, I was just struggling with a tough control scheme, but somehow even that makes the game shine. In research, we find the isotope we need. It's in a super irradiated room, and there were a ton of audio logs talking about an environmental protection suit, but I never found it. I just rushed to the room and grabbed what I needed. What's a little radiation really gonna do to me anyway? I'm sure it's fine. Before heading down to the reactor level, we find that the laser can be fired from research. Now, we heard the logs and know that this is likely a very bad idea. But come on, it's a giant red button. I need to press it. Well, this does exactly what I would expect. Fires a giant laser beam directly into the Earth, decimating the population and killing billions. Shodan congratulates you on your contribution to her schemes, and the game kicks you back to the title screen. I guess that wasn't the canon choice? Get it? Cannon? Like a laser cannon? Anyway, down to the reactor level, we dump the isotope into the shield generator, turn on the shields, and flip the safety override switch. Back to research to fire the laser properly this time. We get a nice cinematic of the laser destroying itself. Shodan shows her biggest flaw here in bragging to us that destroying the laser has changed nothing, and that she is developing a biological virus to mutate the entirety of Earth's population into festering, gibbering, pustulant mutations. Her words, not mine. Well, it was nice of her to tell us what to do next. We need to get to the groves to get rid of that virus. We take the elevator down into maintenance and make a detour here into storage. Before we can combat that biological menace, we need some supplies. First, we need a defense against the biological threats, or we're just going to end up looking like the Master from Fallout. Audio logs have been pointing us this way to find the suit, and they prove accurate. We're able to pick up a level 1 environmental suit in one of the crew members' quarters. We also come across a large stockpile of plastic explosive here. I don't have a specific use for this, but I can't really say no to a bunch of explosives, can I? We stuff our pockets and are next headed to the executive area that houses the groves. Listening to the audio logs, and with some guidance from Rebecca, our goal here is to jettison the Beta Grove, which is the one housing Shodan's genetic experiments. Unfortunately for us, the jettison controls have been disabled by Shodan, and the process for reactivating them is super convoluted. This is one of those times in the game where paying very close attention to the audio logs is key if you don't want to get lost. In order to jettison the Beta Grove, we must first disable the safety interlocks on Alpha, Delta, and Beta. Once that is complete, we will need to disable the Master Safety Interlock. Going to do that, we are assaulted by a powerful red cyborg, unlike any of the others we've faced. We take him down, but the mysterious synthetic teleports away before we can deliver the killing strike. Don't worry, I'm sure that'll be the last we see of him. Anyhow, we go to disable the Master Lock, but find it's also in need of repairs. A diagnostic report has been sent to maintenance, but being as the maintenance staff are all currently mutated abominations, I guess we have to be the guy to submit the trouble ticket, and the one to fulfill it. Back down in maintenance, the diagnostic report lets us know that Relay 428 needs repair. There are 4 quadrants in this section, each with multiple repair points. The name of the game is finding the one we need, while avoiding the many, many Terminators stalking the halls. Repairs complete, one last fun thing to do on this floor is break into the office in the back, which is now accessible since Shodan's security has been lowered to 0 for the floor. There is a secondary lock on the door, requiring a retinal scan, but we find a creative solution to that problem. In the office, we upgrade our environmental suit and get a good chunk of ammo and supplies. Nice little extra, and weirdly on Steam, getting here gives one of only 6 achievements in the entire game. I think they just wanted to make a pun. I can relate. Back to the executive level, we finally disable the Master Safety Interlock and move back to the Beta Grove and finally jettison the Grove into the sun. Damn mutants. Moving toward the next section, Rebecca lets us know that the mutants weren't the end of Shodan's schemes. The AI is now trying to download itself into Earth's communication network, and we need to destroy the antenna before she can finish her transfer. It never ends with these damn AIs. We move on to engineering next, and this place is a gauntlet. Enemies galore, not much else to say. There are 4 antennae to destroy, so that plastic explosive we picked up earlier comes in handy. Good thing I play most games like a pack rat, so we have more than enough to get the job done. On the last antenna, Shodan tries to lock us in with the explosives, but we hack the door and make it out just in time. Shodan once again lets us know that she doesn't care that we're messing with her plans, and that she can't be hurt unless we make it to the bridge. Well, that was sort of a stupid thing to tell us. Her ego will be her downfall. I hadn't brought it up yet, but the audio logs in this game tend to not match with what the voiceover is actually saying, which in and of itself is sort of annoying and one of my bigger gripes with the game, However, the reason I bring it up now is because while Shodan is delivering this monologue, the voice part of the script just vaguely threatens us with a cyborg-related death, but the actual text says when her cyborgs catch us, there will be nothing left of us but red steam. That is probably the most metal threat I have ever heard in my life, and I am devastated we didn't get to hear that voice acted. Such a missed opportunity. Anyhow, with the antenna destroyed, we need to make it to the bridge. But the only way to do that is through security. Unfortunately, security is locked down, but I think we can do enough damage to change that. We now have the entirety of the reactor's destruct code, the one we've been gathering from the various CPUs across the station. We enter the heart of the reactor and start the self-destruct. This actually, for the first time, legitimately pisses Shodan off. She swears revenge and sends her robot army after us. I die a few times, but the restoration bay proves invaluable. We get contacted by Rebecca. She lets us know that we need to get to the life pods and escape before the self-destruct destroys the station. So we make our way to the flight deck. Once there, the mysterious red cyborg shows himself again, but this time speaks to us and reveals that he is, or was, Diego, the man who had us initially turn off Shodan's ethics. He tries to block our way, but once again we dominate him in single combat, and he flees like a coward. Fine by me. We have an escape pod to catch. Jumping on the pod, a countdown starts. But, of course, it can't end that easily. Shodan stops the launch and lets us know that she will be detaching the bridge from the rest of the station to make her escape. Now, I have to point this out again. If she would have just let us leave in the escape pod, we would have been gone and she could have escaped unharmed. Instead, we now have no choice but to make our way to the bridge, her lair, to stay alive. Ego wins again. She should have just let us go. We make the mad dash back through engineering and security as the station begins to destruct around us. Climbing the final ladder to the bridge, we find the room transformed, with some sort of biotech replacing the normally metal walls of the ship. The final elevator is locked, and we're greeted a final time by our good friend Diego. Using the corners to our advantage, we destroy the son of a bitch who caused all this, and make our ascent to the bridge. The bridge itself is covered in the same biological debris as the prior room. There's that creepy feeling here that this is a small slice of what Shodan wants to do with the rest of the world, to transform it into her image. Well, we aren't going to have any of that. We break through the defenses here and hack into the final terminal to face Shodan in our own realm, cyberspace. Now, I haven't really talked about cyberspace too much in this video, mostly because it's vile, and unfortunately, this last section is the worst cyberspace has to offer. It is a literal wire maze of nonsense. You are constantly fighting the controls to get around. Every death sends you back to the start. It all leads to the final confrontation with Shodan. Her embodiment here is a weird, carrot-looking thing. You have to shoot it until it dies before your screen turns white. It's not very hard, and mostly just disorienting. When she dies, the game abruptly cuts to the post-game cinematic. Like, there's no death animation, no last words from Shodan, just an instant cut to a screen saying it's over. The quick ending essentially states that you make it off the station and Tri-Optimum offers you a job, but you are a hacker to the core, so you turn it down and go back to your web hacking ways. Sort of an anticlimax of an ending for such an interesting game, and an even more interesting villain, but I guess that's why we have System Shock 2. So, this is the section where I would normally find some wild takes on the game I'm reviewing, and try to refute them. But even in my deepest digging, the only negative reviews I could find on Steam were upset about it having a micro-stuttering issue in a recent update. Hardly a riveting thing to talk about. Outside of Steam, I found a review posted by Cubed3, a review website. Their review, while not negative, does at least give a good talking point. Doom is Hollywood, and System Shock is the avant-garde cinema. The first is fast, loud, and in your face. The second, subtle, and harder to enjoy and get into. And yet, the first remains fun even to this day. Is it due to its much simpler nature? No, it's just that some things age better than others. And although the Enhanced Edition is a pretty decent update, it cannot erase the prototype's many flaws, especially its chore-like control scheme, a control scheme that can't be altered. To put it simply, this rightfully deserves its spot in the history of the industry, and fans of the original will surely appreciate Night Dive Studios' handling of their beloved classic, but the rest of the community are advised to reconsider spending any money on it. I do think it's unfair to compare System Shock to something like Doom, though must admit it's difficult not to. Hell, I've done it in this video myself. However, while Doom was a pioneer for FPS games, System Shock was something entirely different. It combined FPS with a narrative like no game before, and it did it in a way that wouldn't truly be replicated for years. It had a lasting impact on gaming that is easily still felt to this day. I don't think saying it's aged badly is fair in this context either. Is it harder to get into than Doom? For sure. But that has nothing to do with the age of the game. It was harder to get into than Doom in 1994 as well. It's just simply a more complex game. And while the control scheme is a bit uncanny, it is actually intuitive if you give it a chance. As for the final statement to perhaps avoid this title unless you're a fan of the original, all I can say is I'm glad I personally didn't take this advice, as this was my first experience with the series as a whole, and I absolutely loved every minute of it. Well, except cyberspace. Fuck cyberspace. Like so many games from this era, I missed this one growing up and didn't play it until I was much older. Ironically, it inspired games that were favorites of mine without me even knowing it was doing so. BioShock is arguably the spiritual successor to System Shock in a lot of ways, and it was a game that I played before this. Going back now to play System Shock and seeing all those influences in their inception was nothing short of magical for me. I found this game enthralling from start to finish, and I'm eager to play the sequel. Part of me wanted to just play the 2023 remake to make my life easier, and I do still intend to do that, but I'm so glad I started with the original so I could see the game the way it was intended first. Well, the way it was intended, plus widescreen support, I guess. Like pretty much all the games I've reviewed on this channel, this is one that can be picked up for about $10. I played on Steam, but from the looks of the reviews, it seems like the GOG version might be more stable, so maybe pick up that one. It's even on sale at the time of writing this, though I guess it may not be by the time the video goes live. Only my editor will know for sure. If you have played before, I'm sure I don't have to explain the wonderful and strange experience this game is. And if it is your first time, like it was for me, you're in for a real treat. Take the time, learn the controls, let yourself get lost wandering the station. Don't be afraid to leave the clunky HUD on, and get to stopping Shodan before it's too late. See you in the next video.